Dear friends and colleagues, we are ready to move to the next session on the main stage, which this time is going to feature a live interview, both for you here at the festival, but also those of you watching on the Euronews online channel. We have invited one of the most prominent politicians at the moment in Europe, a candidate for the top job in the European Commission, but also a long-standing supporter both of the European movement, but also of our Democracy for Alliance. Margrethe Vestager will be discussing on stage, together with Isabel Santos from the Euronews channel, everything about democracy, competition, technology, everything under the sky. Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Petros. Hello, I'm Isabel da Silva. I'm a journalist working as European Affairs correspondent at Euronews Brussels delegation. And it's my pleasure and honor to be here with Commissioner Margrethe Vestager, Commissioner for Competition. Thank you very much for coming.
It's indeed a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's start by, well, my personal experience, why not? The first time I met you, I think it was 2012, you were Deputy Prime Minister of Denmark, and you shared the ECOFIN meetings because Denmark had the presidency. I was told that you were also the inspiration for the main character of TV series Borgen, where a female Prime Minister tried to conciliate that tough job with her family. And after this long introduction, the question is, how different was to work for 5 million citizens in your own country and then move to work for 500 million in different countries with different expectations?
For me, it was very different. But the first difference may sound sort of as a small one, but it was a language difference. Because I'd never worked in anything but my mother tongue. And now I had to work in English and a little bit in French. So I had first to consider if I was saying what I wanted to say, that people understood what I wanted to say, and that I understood what they wanted to say if they expressed what they wanted to say. So you had 4 different sort of sources of error. And that sort of installed in me a great respect of the way we talk to one another. That maybe sometimes it's more important to express oneself in a simple way, to be understood, than to be very refined and maybe a little bit distant.
But you feel that you have an audience that you don't know as well as back at home, because as I said, you know, people from Portugal to Finland, I'm Portuguese by the way, they have different expectations, and you were addressing problems all around Europe. So you felt some sort of connection. How did you get this connection with all the European citizens during your work at the Commission?
Well, I think, the first thing was I have never felt as Danish as I do now, having lived outside of Denmark for 5 years. Because I'm always the Dane around the table. Of course, I don't take care of Danish interests, but I'm the one who knows Denmark and the Danish code, firsthand. Just as well as my Bulgarian colleague knows the Bulgarian code firsthand. So we all contribute with something that the others don't really know in that intimate way. But that being said, I also feel more European than ever. Because all our differences being very obvious, we work on something that we have in common. And one of the things that I've been privileged to work with is fair competition. And I think that's a very fundamental thing, and I have experienced that everyone can connect to that. That big or small, you should have a fair chance of making it. You don't want someone to agree on the prices in the back office. You don't want someone to, make the best of it just because they became the big guy. And that I have met all over Europe, that people share. Mm-hmm. And that for me personally has been a very important experience, to have a stronger national identity and a stronger European identity at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So moving to what you have been actually doing for the last almost 5 years, your job is to make sure that powerful corporations like the ones in the internet sector and many others contribute in a fair way to the economy, that the market serves the citizens, that globalization serves the citizens. That looks a little bit like fighting a multi-head dragon. How do you do it? Because these are powerful companies, and most of them are not even in Europe. They are in the United States, in China, elsewhere. So how do you address that effort?
Well, first of all, we have a team for each head, so to speak, because I work with 900 people who are not only, skilled and experienced, they're also very dedicated. And that, of course, is also another lesson learned, that something that looks like, a mountain that you cannot climb, when you have good people and teams that work together, it is doable. The other thing is that Europe is a place where it's great to do business. Everyone is welcome. American companies, Russian companies, companies from all over the world. But you have to play by European rules. And
hence the fines that you are being...
Hence the fines, because if you don't, there is a high risk that you get a high fine. So the thing is that no matter
I think maybe if you put your hand
am
a
I
little
doing
bit...
something
maybe.
wrong?
Yeah, I think.
Yes, probably. If you have done something wrong, one of the things that I have experienced in these 5 years is there's a respect of the rule of law in Europe. People sometimes ask me, well, do they pay the fines? If you sort of get a bill that you have to pay a fine of, the latest Google fine was almost 1.5 billion euros, do they pay? I say, yes, they do pay. They may appeal the decision, but they do pay. Because I think that we live in a union where there is a very fundamental respect of still authorities and institutions and the rule of law.
So, of course, you don't work only with internet sector companies, of course, many others. But we want also to have the participation of the audience in this conversation. And we have Elias here with us that wants to ask a question about digital participation and somehow foresee a little bit what's going to be the future in that area. Can you please ask your question?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. My question is, my generation is heavily invested in social media apps and the internet. I think much more than generations before us. And I think you represented an electorate which didn't depend as heavily on the internet and those apps as my generation does. So my question is, in about 20 or 40 years, when someone who has the same position as you for the European Union, how is that person able to make a fist against a big technology companies when the very electorate they serve is so dependent on them, and so these companies have a big influence over them as well?
That's an excellent question.
Very good, Elias.
Because this is exactly what we're grappling with right now. I think there is this growing sense of awareness that you shouldn't be depending just on one media or one app, that you should try to seek information and views from different sources. I think it's important that we kind of also reinvent being together as we are here, because it makes a difference if you can sense other people. It is another thing to be in the same room than to be in the same app. So I think there will be both sort of from our democracy with our elected representatives, a pushback to give room for other kinds of democracy than one that is app-based. But I also think that there will be a wish for us not just to live in a digital world, but also to come together more. In my own field in competition, we're also pushing to make sure that we have the tools in place actually to get it if something is wrong. Because what we see is that a lot of our economy will be based on platforms. platforms that will host smaller businesses, platforms that will give access to smaller businesses, platforms that may be sort of the make or break also for farming. So everywhere in our economy. And this is now that we want to get it right, to get the tools that we need actually to maintain a fair Europe. So I think there's a number of things that we'll have to push for in the coming years, because otherwise, as you say, if we would take stock in 30, 40 years, I think we would end up in some kind of dystopia, and not in a society that serves citizens or with markets that serves consumers.
So that was really interesting question, in fact, and again, you're explaining that all these companies, not only ones that are here, but a little bit around the world, this is a problem that affects Europeans and people all around the world. So speaking a little bit only on geopolitics, let's make a little bit of a game. I will say the name of 3 countries, and you will say if it's a friend or a rival and how to deal with it. So United States of America, for example.
It's a long-time ally.
And you think it will carry on like that with Donald Trump if he's elected?
Well, of course, it's different because President Trump and his administration, they have a different take. But also with President Obama, we had discussions and also controversies on trade and on other issues. But I think when you have a friendship that stretches back decades, then you don't just give up on one another. Also because the United States is to some degree as diverse as Europe. And I appreciate, for better and for worse, the friendship and the alliance that we have.
What about China? That, there was recently this summit. I think you were quite involved in those agreements and negotiations. So a friend or a foe?
Yeah, well, here actually we've discussed that quite intensively, and we have said, well, China is to some degree a partner, but also a strategic competitor, and therefore anything but a developing country. But for instance, when we discuss climate change, China would be a partner. When it comes to some sort of technology or AI, artificial intelligence, it may be a very strategic competitor.
And finally, Russia, which we always blame for all the disinformation. And is it also a friend, or could be a friend one day? Will we always a rival?
Well, I think sometimes I don't think that we underestimate the threats, because if our elections are interfered with, if our media is interfered with, becoming biased because of state control of a foreign power, that is indeed a very serious problem. But sometimes I think we underestimate there's also a Russian nation that we could connect with in different ways. But not to underestimate the threats. And for some of the countries neighboring Russia, I think it's very closely felt because sometimes their planes will have to go up to show the door to Russian fighter planes. Yeah. And that, I think, is very important to respect. If you're very far from the Russian border, you may not feel it so strong. But if you're close to it, I think it's important that we respect the feeling and stand up for one another to make sure that we have sort of the size that we feel protected.
And now during European elections campaign time, how worried are you about the capacity of Europe of understand what is true, what is fake, where this misinformation comes from, who is actually trying to undermine our democracy? Are you optimistic or a bit scared, like some of us?
Well, I think the only thing that sort of controls my fear of people intervening in our election is the fact that now we are so much more aware. Because we saw the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we have seen the trolling and people interfering, we see the fake news that are real fake news. So there's a different awareness. And when you're aware of something and the steps we have taken to counteract, different people coming together to offer sort of the real story and the facts of a case, when you're better prepared for something that seems scary, then you can actually deal with it. And that I find to be very different from 2 years ago or 5 years ago, where we didn't really, I think, knew what we were dealing with.
That's why festivals like this one are also important, so that politicians address directly the audience and people get firsthand the source of the information of what you intend to do once you get to powerful positions.
But also that so many different people with sort of a very democratic heart comes together. Because this is the first, and what people I have met today, they come from all different sides to say, well, I try to make people vote. I try to make people vote green. I try to make people engage in a civil society. And I think it's also important for someone with an activist's mindset to meet other activists coming from different organizations and different line of thinking to inspire one another.
Mm-hmm. So now you are almost finishing this 5 years term. You've presented yourself to the elections in this Europe team from a liberal group, a team that has 5 women and 2 men, which these days is also some sort of a novelty. Apparently, there are other parties that are not so keen on changing a little bit of the gender parity issue. Is it time for a woman to become president of the European Commission? And what would you do if you were that person? What would you be doing in terms of your leadership style, in terms of your priorities?
Well, I think it's long overdue. When I go to pick up food in our canteen in the Bellemont, I pass by all the portraits of previous Commission presidents, and they're all men. But not only do we need that, we also need gender diversity in the Commission. We're now 9 women out of 28. And the thing is that it's not just about equality between men and women, it's also about better decision making. It's
you say that more diversity leads to better decisions. Is this accurate?
Yes, I definitely think so. If you look at businesses, when they have diversity in leadership, I think you can prove they do better. Because when you're not the same, then you ask different questions. You bring different sorts of knowledge to the table. And the promise is also that men can have more diverse roles themselves. Because with diversity in itself, also for you, more roles can be taken upon you. So the promise of equality is also a promise of a fuller life. Because we can sort of leave the stereotypes behind and more fully engage.
And this diversity should be also at other levels, I mean, not just between men and women, but we don't see often people from different, let's say, ethnic origins or professional backgrounds, either in the Parliament or in the Commission. So would that also be beneficial for understanding what the citizens want?
Yes, indeed, and also in Commission services. We took the decision on one of the first days of this commission to say, by the end of this mandate, 40% of senior management should be women. No laws, no official quotas, no nothing. A decision that within 5 years we will achieve this. And already now, after 4 years and some, we have achieved at least 40% as women in senior management in commission. But we still have a lot to do when it comes to fully reflecting what the European Union looks like. Of course, with different nationalities, a lot of different languages are spoken over a lunch table in the Commission, but we are not at all representative when it comes to the European citizen as such.
Mm-hmm. And it's, in some cases, even going backwards, that we have now one member state that has a government composed exclusively by men, which I don't know if the audience knows which country it is, but it's Lithuania. So maybe you can send a word to the Prime Minister and ask him why he doesn't want to work with women for his mandate. Anyway, we have maybe someone that also wants to ask a question, not only to the Prime Minister of Lithuania, but to you, which is Manon Deshayes. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing correctly. European Women's Lobby. Manon, are you here? All right. You wanted also to ask a question on this issue of gender parity, isn't it?
Hi. Just to present the European Women's Lobby, we're a feminist organization. and we are the largest umbrella organization of women's NGOs all across Europe with around 2,000 members. So we are running a campaign right now for the European elections where we're asking for parity in the European Parliament, but also for women's rights to be at the core of the EU policies. So we need gender equality to be at the heart of the European agenda to ensure that everyone's rights are protected and improved. So at the European Women's Lobby, we are calling for the establishment of a Directorate General that would be focused solely on gender equality. So we just wanted to know what are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's to have just one specific directorate for gender equality. I think there is a risk that it will be a silo. Because actually you find gender issues in everything you do, also for men. So I think there is a number of things that will have to be sort of horizontally important no matter what you do. Because it's a changed way of thinking. Equality is not just something you sort of put on as a label by the end of the process. It's a starting point. Because if you start by thinking about, well, we live in a world where we're different, half is women, half is men, then already there you start thinking also about the data that you collect before you make a proposal, when you do an impact assessment. When you then collect data, then you get a different picture. Take, for instance, such a thing as standard personal protective equipment. Women and male bodies, they are different. So you have to take that into consideration. In doing that, you need different data. If you want to fight inequality in pay, you need data, good data, in order to say what's behind this. Because when you know, and if you have, the willingness to act upon your knowledge, then you can change things. And this is why I think it's a task for each and every directorate. Even in my directorate in competition, we think about gender. Because in some countries, for instance, you have a semi-privatized market for childcare. If there is good quality childcare that is affordable, it's easier for the care person, which is very often a woman, actually to work. So we also looking for ways where competition may actually allow for men and women to be equally present, not only in their working life, but also in their life as a parent. Which is why I think, we should have, of course, equality in pay, equality in power, but we should also have equality in parental leave. I think it would be great if we could promise the next generation that their fathers would also be much more present when they're very small.
So thank you very much, Manon. Let's continue with this topic that you are now about, social inequalities and to have a society that this has a better balance. For that we also need money. I mean, in the sense that to invest in infrastructure, to adapt to climate change, to have better education, we need resources. But middle class is being squeezed. Apparently, governments are not able even to properly tax these big corporations. There was this financial markets transactions taxing that was also an idea. In the end, nothing came out of it. So, how to find the resources to deal with so many pressing issues and to give a better quality of life for the citizens?
Well, exactly, the taxation issue is an important issue because I think, value should be taxed where it's generated. So you just don't move your profits from one country to another country to a third country where it may not be taxed at all or very little. And in my cases, what we see is that some businesses or groups of businesses, they have relied on specific arrangements that are selective, they're only for them, and yet the majority of businesses, they pay their taxes. And this is, of course, a push for tax fairness. Digital taxation as well. When you do comparable data, digital business, they would pay on average 9% in tax, where other businesses will pay 23% in tax. This is obviously not fair.
A lot of money that should be coming into the economy.
Exactly.
The real economy.
Exactly, into the real economy. And if our corporate taxation was invented, I think, a century or more ago, and if we do not learn corporate taxation about a digital world, then it will not understand how value is being created when everything becomes digital. So we need to update our understanding of corporate taxation to be relevant when everything becomes digital. Because otherwise, well, then state coffers, they will just lose out. And as you say, we have a lot of things to invest in.
Exactly. Well, when we think that a quarter of the Europeans actually live in poverty, you know, in such a rich continent, around 22% of people don't have enough money to make a living. 1 in 4 Europeans struggle to pay the rent of their house. A precarious job is now the norm. So we have this single market, which has achieved a lot, but could we also have, a single welfare system? Could we move to things like basic minimum wage for everyone, equal social benefits? Do you foresee a time where Europeans will be also equal in that sense, or at least the ones that are in the weakest link, let's say?
Well, I think it will take some time. We have placed very little sort of power in our European democracy when it comes to social issues. So my colleague, Marianne Thyssen, has done a very impressive job in then taking it as a political issue. So instead of making it a legal thing, because we have very limited ways of doing that, then make a political pledge to make sure that social benefits are more available, that childcare is good, the things that allows you to live a full life. And the strategy is quite simple, is to say that we should converge on still higher levels. Because then you can see that the prosperity created in member states actually is translated also into welfare. And the good thing right now is that some of the countries where citizens on average have the least, they're growing much more than sort of more traditional richer member states, which actually do mean that we are converging, that those who were poorer become richer, while the rich, they don't come even richer as fast. And that's a very good thing, but it will still take a lot of time. And I also think that it's important that we have room for member states taking different decisions, because we have strong national democracies, and it's a fair thing that you have a different preference in each and every member state, because the goal is not for us to be the same. The goal is for us to be an inclusive union, but have room for the differences expressed in national democracies.
Very well. Let's speak about one topic that is now in all newspapers, that is also mentioned in polls, that concerns a lot of citizens, which is that, in order to make progress in the continent and in the planet, we need to have a planet, actually. So the environment, the climate change issues are very important, not only in the sense of quality of life, but in terms of a new economy that might be developing in transport, in infrastructure, in our agricultural model. Apparently, the next budget for the next 7 years, a quarter of that money will be dedicated to environment and climate change. Do you believe that, big power of interest like oil and gas and coal companies and a lot of governments depending on that type of wealth will keep pushing this agenda to later in the future, that we still have a lot of time to deal with this?
Well, I see progress. Actually, quite some time ago, it was decided that if a coal mine is in economic trouble, you cannot save it. You cannot put in money just to restructure it, to make it continue. But you can put in money actually to close it and allow people to move on. Mm-hmm. And that happens. And we were sort of, will it really happen? But actually, it does happen.
You have examples.
Yes, we have a number of examples where people said, this mine, since people don't want coal anymore and prices are coming down, we cannot rescue this place. So we'll close it, but we'll invest in giving people new skills, in investing in new ways of doing business in this region. Because I think it's very important that when we transition, that we do that in an inclusive manner, that you can see yourself that you're part of this. Also because if you have been in the mining industry for 4 generations, it's not just your job, it's also your culture. This is what you do. And this is why it's not just people who are against transitioning into a more climate-wise economy, it's also a cultural travel to do things so differently. And this is why climate change is, I think, something we should take as a given, because it's there, but we have to discuss how to deal with it and how to enable that to create also many, many jobs of the future. When we get rid of waste, to reuse resources, a lot of jobs will be created there. But that will have to be done in each and every sector.
We have with us Jeremy Waits from the European Environmental Bureau that wants to ask you a question on this topic.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. Good evening, Commissioner. Yes, we would very much like to hear from you a bit more about your perspective on environment. It was a little bit less than 5 years ago that the Juncker priorities were unveiled. It was before you were a commissioner. And they sent shockwaves, literally, through the environmental movement and indeed through the environmental sector because of the very limited environmental content, with the exception of climate change that you've just spoken about. Now, in fact, I would acknowledge that the Commission that you're part of has achieved quite a lot on environment, but this has been because of huge pushback from member states, from the parliamentarians, and of course from the NGOs. So it's been actually despite rather than because of the Juncker priorities. I want to ask you about your views about the place of environment in the priorities of the next Commission, and zooming out a little bit from environment, place of sustainability. Would you see sustainability as one among other key priorities for the Commission, or would you actually see it as the overarching priority within which other priorities should be there? And which would you see as the key environmental challenges for the Commission, the new Commission, where at the moment the Commission and the EU itself is not doing enough? Thank you.
Well, as you can hear, I'm not in the habit of answering anything short. But that being said, this is a real challenge because a lot can be said about it. We all signed up for the 17 development goals. And that, in a way, ought to be what everything we do is directed to fulfill. Because the great thing about this development goals is that they are for everyone, for every country on our globe, no matter what you think of yourself. If you're developed or more developed, that's not the point. The goals are for everyone. And that would also mean that sustainability would be sort of a thing that is integrated in everything we do, because it's a strategy. Sustainability is a strategy, because when you start thinking about it, well, then you see that this is not something that you just put on at the end of a process. It's something that will allow you to create jobs in a new way, to understand growth in a new way, to decouple creation of jobs and better opportunities from our environmental and carbon footprint. And that, of course, is the challenge. And this is why, of course, you say that it was despite of the priorities, the fact that things were achieved because of the commitment of member states and NGOs and others also shows that we can have a discussion about, well, how do we do this? Because it's not uncontroversial. We saw that when we discussed a thing like glyphosate. How do we get the right research on board to figure out how to use it, if to use it, which ended up in a shorter prolongation of the right to use it, with some member states taking more steps. With the discussions about endocrine disruptors, the thing that can change your ability to have children, that can disturb sort of the gender identity of animals, fish in nature. So we have a big push to do, but we have to do it in an inclusive way so that people don't scare off. I think that the chemistry that we live with and in is one of the main issues, because those things that are harmful for humans, that will influence not only the human body and our societies, but also the nature that we live in. And in that, of course, we need to use part of our funds also for research in order to figure out, well, what goals to set, how to move out of the things that we find to be dangerous in order to invent substitutes for that.
Very well. It's really enormous, gigantic theme in terms of our future. But I wanted now to move on at this point of our conversation to a theme that is kind of the elephant in the room all the time, which is, of course, Brexit. We had another summit yesterday. Another date was set, 31st of October. But I would like maybe to do a short introduction to this theme by reading a little bit of a chapter of a book called Autumn by Ali Smith, this British author. When the referendum was announced, she started a series of books about what was going on in the UK. So she wrote Autumn, then Winter. She just released Spring now, and summer will come in the future. And in one of the chapters, it's only 3 pages, and she writes something like this. I'm just going to read a little bit. All across the country, people felt it was the wrong thing. All across the country, people felt it was the right thing. All across the country, people felt they really lost. All across the country, people felt they really won. All across the country, people felt they'd done the right thing and other people had done the wrong one. All across the country, people looked up on Google, what is the EU? All across the country, people look up in Google, move to Scotland. All across the country, people looked in Google Irish passport applications. All across the country, people felt unsafe. All across the country, people were laughing. All across the country, people felt legitimized. All across the country, people felt shocked. All across the country, people felt righteous. All across the country, people felt like they counted for nothing. So these divisions, they exist not only in the UK. In the European Union, there are a lot of people feeling excluded. The globalization has put them aside. They are not prepared. 40% of Europeans don't have the basic skills for this digital economy that we were talking about. So what lessons do we have to learn from the Brexit situation also for the continental European Union?
But I don't think we should sort of take the Brexit lesson, because I think it goes even deeper than that, because it's exactly about do you feel counted in? If you're fired from your job, then often or within a certain time frame you can find a new job. But if you feel that you're fired from your society, then where do you go? And I think with the financial crisis and the sovereign debt crisis, and with globalization and things becoming more digital, there is sort of an insecurity. What is this going to mean that I share? Because we don't know. And if it's not discussed and not addressed, I think frustration can turn into anger.
In the case of the UK, they found an enemy, a common enemy that was the European Union.
Yeah, but I think there's also, maybe in the specific Brexit case, I think there's also a lesson to be learned for politicians and media. Now I'm a happily married woman, but I think if you bitch a little bit every day, you end up getting divorced. And
sound advice.
And this ongoing, never sort of fully engaging.
There were some internal political games, you know. There was there was also a referendum without a proper debate. We will have now 6 months extension, probably a new prime minister, maybe a new referendum. Do you think at this time there is still a solution? Will we still be on time of keeping the UK inside the European Union, or is it already lost?
Well, actually, I have come to a point where I think that they got to figure out what they want.
But they have to know about it, no? They have to debate it more, don't you think?
I don't know how they will organize things. But,
Nobody knows.
But we have things to do. And we cannot allow Brexit to overshadow important things. Because it keeps occupying our mind, our media, precious time that heads of state of government could use by discussing with one another what to do next, how to agree more, what are the important things that we want to deal with. Because right now we have no agreement on how to protect refugees, how to deal with illegal immigration. We're still discussing how to deal with our external borders. We have a lot of discussions about trade, and very important discussion that eventually will influence our everyday life. And yet they spend hour after hour after hour on Brexit. So I do hope that with the now prolongation and the fact that they can leave whatever day they're ready, then it's a British question.
But if they get to elect British get to elect MEPs now, again, they will be participating in the election probably. Mm-hmm. Is that a cause of concern that they will try somehow to block things, to make it more difficult, even if it's only until October probably?
Yeah, but if you want to leave something, why would you then want to ruin it before you go? I think that would be a very strange thing. And anyway, now we have the campaign. Then the parliament, of course, has to make their own decisions about the president and committees and all of that. And after that, the parliament will be, very, very engaged in how to establish a new commission. Having the oral examinations of each and every commissioner to see if they are probably engaged to do their job, and only then, and then we will be by late September, October something, you will sort of get back to a more sort of legislative work and the budget for the next 7 years. So I think there's also a limit, as even if you had bad intentions, how much you can express those bad intentions.
Let's hope that Mr. Michel Barnier, is coming after Commissioner Vestager, will give us some more explanation on that. We can maybe pass to a topic that I think you are keen on speaking, which is also migration, and the fact that, because that was a topic very important in the UK, the fact that they felt they didn't have any control about how many people were coming to the UK, where they were coming from, etc. So far, we don't have a common policy. The military rescue operation in the Mediterranean doesn't have boats anymore to rescue people, it's just airplanes. There will be another crisis. We know there will be another war, a natural disaster. So are we going again as European Union to go to the emergency motto? Do you have any hope that with the next Commission we'll find a common policy in this time?
Well, we have asked member states to make sure that we get the legal basis. But only 5 out of 7 proposals are agreed upon. So there's still work to do. And I think we need to continue very intensively with this very broad strategy that was made back 2015 when many, many refugees came. And the thing was that back then, of course, it was urgent to save people from drowning. But we treated it as urgent to invest in and building up partnerships with African countries. And that may only give results in 5 or 10 or 15 years. But if you don't invest now in something that will produce results in the long term, then we can do nothing but to try to save people. So it was a number of things that had to be done at the same time. Also to establish the European Coast and Border Control that we're now pushing for to make a real thing, and to start preparing for sort of a parallel to the ESTA system. Both things allowing us to know in much more detail who's coming and going in Europe. But we need some of the most important pieces of this puzzle, and they are not agreed upon yet.
Because what sometimes we see, a lot of the economic migrants and also refugees want to go to Germany or Sweden. because that is the image of El Dorado in Europe they have. But there are actually some member states that wanted to receive more people. They need them to work. They have universities where they could take some of these young people. And I can give an example of Portugal that was trying to bring people from Greece and from Italy to Portugal. And the union couldn't find the basis, not even in a bilateral way, of redistributing these people. So are you also losing the opportunity to do order integration of people that would be a welcome in some member states?
But this is where things become tricky, because there are basically three different situations. I think that Europeans have a big heart for people who seek refuge, because anyone would wish to have the same protection if we were the one who had to flee. But then you have the question of immigration for more economic reasons. And I think it is important to say, well, you cannot illegally immigrate to Europe. You can do that legally. We ought to establish ways where you legally can immigrate. If a country needs people to come, you have businesses who need people to come to work for them with different skills. That would be an important input to establish yourself in that country, also to develop jobs for the people who are there already. And I think it's very important to be sort of quite precise here, because we cannot have it that you have sort of a de facto acceptance that you can come but in irregular way. It is important that we know who's here, why they're here. Are they here for protection and given asylum, or are they here to work?
Okay, we are almost at the end of this session. I wanted to, going back a little bit to the gender issue, maybe Manon will be pleased. You said that one of your favorite sayings, I think it is, if a woman wants to go place to places, she should bring her own leather. I think you have one in your office. I read it in The Guardian, I think. If you will not have a role in the Commission, where will you bring your leather? What we're going to do in the European Parliament? What are your concrete plans for your political future?
Well, the thing is that in my, I never really planned for my working life, because I have this feeling that planning, it works a little bit like blinders. You know, the thing you put on horses so they're not disturbed. But in my experience, the important thing is to allow yourself to be disturbed, because sometimes the next thing happens out here, in the corner of your eye, and you should be able to see that. And the other thing that I have experienced is that if your next job should be a good one, then you better do the job you have already with your best of efforts.
You would feel happy at the European Parliament?
Well, you know, I think I will feel happy doing a number of different things. And if nothing else, then in order to make up for all the flying while being a commissioner, I can start planting trees.
Just to, on that line, because it's interesting that you say that you're open to other options, because you come from a family with some political experience, I think, from your grandfather to your mother. And we are also here talking about youth and the political participation of the next generation. If one of your daughters wanted to go into politics, what would you think about it, and what advice would you give her, or them, depending which?
Well, I would wonder, because now she has experienced it firsthand. Is this really what you want to do? But the thing is, I never really wanted to be a politician. I wanted to take part in my community. So when I was in primary school, in my school, there was no food, not even a small yogurt or a juice or a piece of bread. If you had left home in a hurry in the morning and you didn't have breakfast, there was nothing you could do. So we engaged to make it available. A group of us said, well, let's establish, a small thing here, not for profit, where you can buy just a simple thing. And later, when I got to university, I engaged in trying to develop new subjects. I'm trained as an economist, and we wanted to be able to talk about economy in plain language. And once you're an economist, you need to sort of retrain doing that, sort of to develop new courses. So my ambition was to engage in what I was doing, and then one thing took the other. So my advice would not be to try to be a politician. My advice would be to engage in your community.
And when you see these young women, like the young Swedish girl, and now Nuna de Wever as well in Belgium, going to the streets, especially for climate change, a lot of these young people are also, of course, young girls. Does that make you more optimistic about the future generation that will come into politics?
Oh, but it makes me happy. I'm a great admirer of Greta Thunberg. I think it is great what she's doing because she has a point. This point to say, well, I will sacrifice part of my future because schooling, going to school and getting skills and getting insights, that is part of my future. And I will sacrifice that because if you don't do something, that future will be very different because climate change will change the way we live. Because the weather will be so much wilder, and it will change the way our countries look and what we'll have to deal with. And it's a simple, straightforward point, and she invests herself in doing that. And that I find to be very, very, that's a good inspiration.
Unfortunately, Greta Thunberg was not allowed to give a speech in the plenary at the European Parliament in Strasbourg by the current MEPs. We hope that maybe after the election she will be invited there. Thank you very much, Commissioner Vestager, for coming and to share all your ideas and your prospects for the future. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Michel Barnier should be coming in a few minutes, I believe. So please either take a little break, but we would really appreciate that you stay for the next session. Let's try not disrupt and keep ourselves inside very warm, let's say.
Anyway, and the whole
okay?
Yes,
I don't know that she was having a little bit more trouble, but maybe she was touching something, no?
I think so, because you have to
Thank you so much anyway. It's okay, I think she handled it okay. I think she likes to move her hands, that's why she wanted. But I think she did.
I didn't ask for the
I just wanted to say thank you also on behalf of Eva and her bedrooms.
Because I
I'm
have
Eva's assistant, so
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Unfortunately, Eva had to leave early.
Yeah,
Everyone was.
she has 38 degrees temperature, so
Because I was trying to find her. I said, oh, why don't I see Eva?
yeah, I mean that's the reason. I mean she didn't feel very well, but she didn't want to cancel and she it's very, very nice. Yes. So she's away home now, but hopefully she will be fine. But I mean I didn't want to share all that.
Okay,
That's worries. But
hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Bauke.
Nice to meet you. Yes.
Yes. Number 2 on the list.
Yes, glad you made it. I hope you were okay.
Yeah, we had a lot of bit of a crisis back. Everything is fine now. It's solved.
Hey,
What's up? Good to see you.
yeah, nice to join it.
Good.
We're exhausted, but I didn't realize you were coming. That's good.
Yes.
Good stuff. Okay, we'll have a beer after.
Managed to get to the assembly, but
That's okay. That's
okay.
that's as important. Yeah, she's arriving at 7 o'clock.
So I will ask everyone please to take your seats. Apparently Mr. Michel Barnier is coming. He has just arrived after a long day and evening and night yesterday. As we know, it was a meeting that finished at 2 a.m., so I guess we took his time to arrive, but he'll be here.
I non
Spagliala tu. Sai che tu? Sì, sai che deve fare
penso che c'hai spazio.
Sembra che continua a spagliare.
Thank you very much all for your patience. We have our second special guest for the evening just arrived. Fresh out of the EU Council negotiations and after having driven across Belgium and Netherlands, Mr. Barnier, the chief EU negotiator for the UK's exit from the European Union, will be taking part in the next session of Talking Europe together with Isabel. Isabel.
Thank you, Petrus. Thank you very much, Mr. Michel Barnier, for being here after such a hectic day and night yesterday. I would like to start our conversation with the audience that will have the opportunity to ask us questions on some topics. I remember when I was listening to one of your keynote speeches about the Brexit, you started by saying something around these lines. Please forgive me if I'm not quoting you exactly the way you said it, but that you worked for 10 years to prepare the Winter Games that last for 2 weeks. And that was the greatest lesson on patience that you got so far. So how have you been applying that lesson to this Brexit never-ending story?
First of all, good evening to all of you, and let me apologize for I've been a little bit late. A long trip to get this place, and but I want to thank you also not only for the invitation, but also to give me the opportunity to get a ball of oxygen after. Not only a long day, but also a long night. The European Council ended at 2:30 this morning. So thank you very much for... yes, we have to applaud the head of states and the leaders also. Yes, it is the Brexit is a school of patience. But
you have a master now, a PhD.
No, what you recall as just, it was not a joke. In my long background, I spent 10 years of my life, from 81 to 92, with a very famous triple gold medalist in ski, Jean-Claude Killy, to organize the Winter Olympics in Albertville, my town, my constituency in Savoy. So 10 years for 16 days. It's also a good training for the Brexit.
Do you think the Brexit will be as successful as the Winter Games
were
eventually?
No. Let me just... The organizing the Winter Olympics or the Summer Olympics or any great event is a positive project. The Brexit is negative. The Brexit is negative. The Brexit is a lose-lose game. The Brexit has no added value. No, and until now, nobody, even Mr. Farage, has been able to give me any proof of the added value of the Brexit.
So now we have a new date, 31st of October, which is the day before the new Commission will start a new mandate, will start a new political process for the next 5 years. So was this date also, it's 6 months, also selected to avoid that the UK will keep disrupting European Union life? We were having a discussion with Commissioner Vestager about that. Do you think that in 6 months' time there will be maybe elections, a new referendum? What do you expect to happen?
What I expect to happen, what I hope, and what I really hope is that the UK will be able to ratify the treaty. If the will and the wish of the UK authorities, the UK Parliament, the UK government is still to leave, as they have decided to leave 3 years ago. 3 years ago. It's time for them to act and to decide. And once again, it must be clear that we regret this vote. I regret profoundly the Brexit. But we have to respect the decision of the UK citizens, the majority of them, and to implement this decision. So we are at that stage. I've worked with my team, which is an exceptional team, 2 years under the control and under the mandate of the European Council, the head of state, the European Parliament. Don't forget the European Parliament. On our side, the European Parliament will have the last word to ratify. So we have worked to implement the decision of the UK citizens, because we have to respect this decision, which is a sovereign decision, even if we regret this decision. So now it's time. It's time for decisions in the UK side, and it's clear that what happened, the situation today is and has been unpredictable and remain uncertain. But what the European leaders decided yesterday is to give more time for the UK to be able to decide.
The festival today started with this Irish comedian Andrew Maxwell. I had the opportunity to be here for 5 or 10 minutes, and he said that there was an absolute absence of information that were all about myths and fairy tales, that people were given a word in the referendum, but they were not actually very aware of what was going on. If I may, I can also quote Yuval Noah Harari, this writer that wrote this. Yuval Noah Harari, he wrote the 21 lessons for the 21st century. And he says, for better or worse, elections and referendums are not about what we think. They are about what we feel. Apparently, the UK will now also hold European elections. Do you think the debate for the elections will give some more information to the people and make the conversation go into the right direction?
Well, clearly, if I am frank, and I want to be frank with all of you, there is a kind of paradox. Is it the right word in English? Paradox?
I think so. Paradox is very good.
Paradox for a country who decided to leave the EU to organize European elections. But the fact is that until the UK leave, as long as he is a member of the European Union, the UK and the citizens of the UK keep all the right and the obligation of a member state. That means that if the UK is still a member the 23 or 22 of May, respecting the right and obligation, respecting first the right for the citizens to vote, and I'm not speaking only of the British citizens, but also the European citizens, the EU 27 citizens living and working in UK, who have the right to vote and the right to be represented exactly as a British citizen living here in Netherlands and or Belgium and France to vote and to be represented during the European elections. So we have to respect this right, and that means that if the UK has not yet decided to ratify this agreement, this treaty, before the 22 of May, he will have to organize the European elections. So that is the point. And any election is, in my view, and I was elected in so many elections during my political life, any election is useful for the debate, for the democracy, for the pedagogy also. So it could be, I hope it will be used by the candidate in UK. But yesterday we will receive Theresa May at the beginning of the European Council, at 28, and after the leaders worked at 27, and I take part of this debate. But at the first stage, Theresa May came and explained why she needs more time, and also explained that she wants to use this time to get as soon as possible the agreement of the Parliament, thanks to this very new, unusual process in UK, which is
having the opposition and the dialogue.
Which is to speak with the opposition.
Yep.
Could be strange to say that, but she
quite common
told
in
us
other places.
She told us that she repeat this afternoon or this morning in front of the House of Commons that it is an unusual process to speak and to have this cross-party dialogue. So it could be strange, but it is a fact. So she hopes that this cross-party dialogue could give an outcome, positive outcome, in the next few weeks. And she said, she told us that if it is the case, before the 22 of May, in that case, the UK will not organize the European election.
Well, in a divorce, at least, in real life divorces, there are lawyers sometimes for one party, sometimes for the other, sometimes one for both, but there is neutral part. There is a family mediator that tries to bring some consensus. Is there someone or some institution that could have that role, that could have the role of Switzerland, let's say, that find a compromise? I'm saying in the UK, because the negotiation from the European part is finished. So who could, maybe the Queen?
I was waiting for the end of the question. We have negotiated. We are still able to negotiate what remain open, which is the political declaration, which is the framework of the future relation with the UK. So we negotiate only with the UK government. And it's difficult for me as a EU negotiator to intervene or to give my personal feeling or my personal opinion about the domestic and the national politics in UK. I have to respect this political and parliamentarian life, and I will do that, because it's not my role, it's not my mission to intervene or to give my personal opinion. So when you asked a question a few minutes ago about what about a referendum, a new public vote, what about general election, I can have my personal opinion on these two topics, but I can't give my opinion publicly. And I think we have to understand that point and the point of view. So I don't certainly not comment about the role of the Queen. Huh?
Well, yeah, well, nobody really knows what she thinks about at this point. But let's hope that these 6 months bring some clarity. You have been working in a close relationship with Theresa May, her government, several ministers. I don't know if you want to disclose how is this relationship between the two of you, but do you fear that a hardline conservative prime minister may come in and replace her? And then for the second part of this negotiation, for the future relationship, everything will become even more complicated.
First of all, we are still in the first part of the negotiation. And it's not finished. It will be finished with the ratification by the House of Commons of this treaty, including
is it easier to do
this
it
package.
Theresa May?
This package, I don't know. Don't ask me to. I'm not a journalist, so sorry. I cannot comment and cannot intervene. It's not my role. I have no right to intervene in the domestic debate of the UK. I worked, I negotiate, and I respect the UK government. And I have already worked with 3 ministers in charge of the Brexit.
Exactly.
And I'm ready to work with any minister sent by Mrs. May. I respect these people, and I want to help them as the UK, the EU leaders decided yesterday. You have to understand why finally the 27 once again unanimously decided to give these 6 months of extension of the negotiations. We do not need this extension on our side. For the withdrawal agreement, 600 pages, not so easy to read, but the negotiation is over. We will not reopen this negotiation on the withdrawal agreement. What still is open now is what we call the political declaration, easier to read, 26 pages, describing the future relationship between the UK. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, what is much more important than the divorce, using your word, is the future relation with the UK. The divorce is just to put certainty where the separation creates so many uncertainties. and we have worked seriously, rigorously, objectively with the UK to find the way to give answers and to put again legal certainty in so many areas, in so many issues where the divorce create, as any divorce, as any separation create uncertainty. I can just give you, just to explain what is the content, the substance of this 600 pages of the new treaty on the Brexit. Number one, the citizens. 3.5 million people, citizens from the 27 are living and working in the UK. 1.5 million British citizens are living, working in one of the 27 countries. All these people, at the totality, 4.5 people or 5 million people, has rights, social rights, social security rights, citizen rights. And we agree with the UK to give a certainty and to give a security of all these rights for all these people for the duration of their life, for themselves and their family. It is a huge, and it was, and it still is our first priority in this negotiation, to give certainty and security for the citizen rights.
And that is also very well accepted, I think, from the British part. One issue that has been more complicated is the Ireland issue, the backstop. But Ireland has been very much, let's say, protected by the other 26 member states. Do you feel that this is really important because any violent incident or could really bring the ghosts of the past to Ireland?
There is no added values for the Brexit, clearly. It is a lose-lose game. But the place where you can have the proof that the Brexit could be very negative and create, I don't know the word in English, regression, huh? The contrary of a progress is Ireland. Is Ireland. Regression.
Regression.
Can also speak French, and perhaps it could be. But regression, in regression. So why? Because after so many troubles and difficulties and the crisis in this island of Ireland between the two communities in Northern Ireland, 21 years ago, not so far, they decided, these people, the leaders, two of them got the Nobel Prize, John Hume and David Trimble, imposed a peace, thanks to a strong document called the Good Friday Agreement. And thanks to the Good Friday Agreement, now there are on the island of Ireland, between the two communities, 140 different cooperations for young people, women, for many issues, environments, health, and so on. Supporting by the UK government, by the Irish government, and obviously by the European authorities, the budget of the EU.
Financial resources as well.
The resources, the peace program. I have been in charge of the peace program 15 years ago as a commissioner in charge of the regional policy. And the key point, the key of this stability, of this peace, is the fact that there is no border. You are here, where we seated, in UK, Northern Ireland, we cross this room, and you are in Republic of Ireland. It is key to keep this situation. We cannot, and we must not, and we will not rebuild a border. But
there has to be some control.
But the fact is, this situation is okay, no problem, until as long as the countries are in the same single market and the same customs union. Why? Because I just want to recall that at each and every external border of the single market, 500 million consumers and citizens, 22 million businesses. That is a single market. At each and every external border, we are obliged to implement a series of control for each good entering in the single market. Why? To protect the consumers, animal disease, food security, for instance, to protect the budget, national and European budget, through the fees and the rights of VAT and custom rights, and to protect the businesses, to check the norms and the standard of the products imported. Why? To fight against the counterfeiting. So, protecting the consumer, protecting the budget, protecting the businesses is the reason why we implement this control. So, in Ireland, the new limit, because of the Brexit, the new limit of the single market go straight in the middle of the island. And we need to implement these checks and these controls for each good entering in the island or in the Republic of Ireland without rebuilding a border. That is the point.
So it's
because
fitting a square in a circle.
Let me just explain that an animal, and we have to prevent and to be very careful about the animal disease. Remember that I have been the French Minister for Agriculture and Fishery, so I'm very involved in these matters. Any animal entering in Northern Ireland coming from Great Britain, the same country, is entering in Netherlands, in Greece, in Belgium, in Spain, mechanically, because we are speaking the same single market. We have no control inside because we implement the control at the external border. And the external border of the single market goes through the middle of the island. So we have to find a solution. And what we have proposed, the first stage is to include exceptionally Northern Ireland in our custom territory. And I face a strong opposition of a part of the political leaders of Northern Ireland, the DUP and so on, a huge critic about the fact that the EU want to implement borders between two parts of the UK. It was not our goal. Just with my team, working to find operational solutions for the problem created by the Brexit. And what creates a problem in Northern Ireland is the Brexit, nothing else today, and put at risk the stability. So the second proposal I put on the table is to incorporate the totality of the UK-wide solution in our custom territory unless we find together another solution. And now the second proposal, which in fact was at the beginning the proposal of the UK itself, is opposed by a part of the Brexiters, speaking about the fact that you will oblige, will maintain against its will, and we wish UK in our custom unity. So this is the difficulty we face
very complicated.
But everything is complicated, huh?
Yeah.
Everything.
And very complicated, and for the Irish people also very delicate. But we could move on maybe now to speak a bit about the impact of Brexit in Europe, because you are one of the people saying that we have to learn lessons, that some of the issues that were making the UK citizens upset about the EU, we can also find them here in Europe, and that European Union has to reinvent the model. So where should we start to reinvent European Union to address people's problems, namely in jobs, in economy, in thinking that they are going to be taken into consideration?
Let me just
you want to go back?
Say a few words more about the Brexit itself, not for the divorce, which is the reason of this treaty, but the second document is much more important, describing the future relation, because in any case, the UK will remain a great country, a neighbor, a partner, a friend, an ally. So my goal and my mission is also to prepare the second stage, a new negotiation after the Brexit negotiation, and we are ready to open as soon as possible after the ratification of the divorce treaty. We are ready to build and to work on what is most important, the future and sustainable and unprecedented partnership with the UK in many fields where we have to rebuild after the Brexit. For instance, trade and economy, specific cooperation in some issue sector,
in aviation,
aviation,
police,
transport, cooperation between universities, the Erasmus program.
So they will be on board with us for many years to come.
Third pillar would be about police and justice cooperation, and finally also, because the UK will remain a member of the Council of Security of the United Nations, to build a strong partnership about defense, external security and foreign policy. So we are ready, and I am ready, the Commission is ready to launch 10 or 12 tables of negotiation, parallel negotiations to build this partnership. And this point is important for you as citizens coming from many countries, because at that stage, for these new negotiations and the new treaties or the new agreements we have to build with the UK, it will be mixed treaties, mixed agreement, requiring not only the ratification by the European Parliament on our side, but also the ratification of the 27 national parliaments by unanimity.
So a long process as well.
I recommend not to underestimate
the
difficulty of this process. It's the reason why I answer to invitation, and I'm now doing my third tour of the 27 capitals, meeting each time the Prime Minister, the trade unions, the business community, and the national parliaments in each capital, because we have to prepare in the same transparency, the same spirit of dialogue and trust, this second stage of negotiation. I come back to your...
So the question about
yes,
now our future with them, of course, with this relationship that you are saying,
yes,
there will be a close relationship. They will be next to us. It's an island. It's not a boat. It's not going anywhere. So...
This is the fact that the Brexit is not only important and serious about the relation between EU and UK, it's much more important than this problem. It's about the future of Europe, the idea on which we have to work for Europe, and the fact that the proof that what is at stake through the Brexit negotiation and the Brexit crisis is much more important, and not only the relations between UK and EU. It's about the future of Europe. Why? I just mentioned Mr. Farage. Huh? You know Mr. Farage. Huh?
That might become again a member of the European Parliament.
Yes, perhaps. Depends of the citizens. Huh? Depends of the voters. Huh? Depends of the democracy.
Absolutely.
I met Mr. Farage a few months ago at its request. And at the end of this meeting, which was a very stimulating meeting, ask him one question. Mr. Farage, can you tell me, because you were the front line of this Brexit campaign, you won, okay, now we are going to deliver the Brexit, okay. Can you tell me how, after the Brexit, you see the future relation between EU and UK? What is your vision of the
future?
And the answer of Mr. Farage has been, and it's still very interesting. It's very short and clear. Immediately, he answered to this question, Mr. Barnier, after the Brexit, the EU will no longer exist. After the Brexit, the EU will no longer exist. This man wants, and some others, to destroy the EU. Destroy the European project. Donc we have to be careful. And my message to you today is take care of Europe. It's fragile.
Mr. Barnier, do you think
so
also that
means
just
that we are
to go what you are saying, do you think that the Brexit also is kind of a vaccine against other countries that would think about, oh, this is too difficult, let's move on, and somehow they will try now the countries to organize and resolve the differences instead of just everyone going in separate ways.
It's not enough to see you, to recognize the fact that in many countries, perhaps this one where we are today, in my country, Italy, some political leaders who 2 or 3 years ago made so many speeches about for their country to leave the Eurozone or to leave the EU. It was the case for Mrs. Le Pen, for instance. It's no longer the case today. But it's not enough to see or to recognize this situation. We have to draw the lesson of the Brexit. And I recommend to listen, to understand, and to answer to the people. Because it's probably too late for the EU, for the UK, because it decided to leave. It's not too late for the other countries. And I spent a very interesting time to listen. The reason why I received, my door has been open to each and every UK leaders. And I see and I try to understand why 52% of the British citizens vote against Europe. And there is obviously many British reasons, but there are also reasons about the social crisis, the social fear, the people asking for more protection against the bad consequences of the globalizations. We have to understand. And in the poorest regions of UK, you can find the same roots and the same reasons that in many other regions of Europe. In my country, I try to understand why in many regions of the north of France, for instance, Mrs. Le Pen, the extreme right, reach sometimes in some regions 45, 48%, sometimes more of the voters. Why? And it's interesting to understand that there are 4 curbs which follow exactly the same line. The curb of the vote for Mrs. Le Pen, following a second curb, the curb of the unemployment, following a third curb, which is a curb showing the distance from your house to a railway station, and the fourth one is a curb showing the distance from your house to a doctor.
So the people that feel excluded.
We have to understand what that means.
That people
feel
excluded.
We don't try to understand, to listen and to answer to what means these curves, it could be dangerous.
Is that your interpretation, that people feel excluded, not protected? So let's go to the solutions. How can we provide them the protection and the inclusion and make them part of the new economy? This green economy, for instance, is one of your proposals that Europe champions this model. The President Macron has even talked about a European Climate Bank to finance that new model. Is something that you think the next Commission could put the resources on?
I'm not speaking and acting and campaigning for Europe to be at the front line against the climate change because only because the President Macron speak about this point. Huh?
No, I was giving just his point of view as a Frenchman.
I've been a French Minister for Environment 20 years ago. I've wrote several books on this point, and so it's my strong feeling and my strong opinion that it is the key issue is in fact to fight against the climate change and for Europe to act together. And so yes, we have to follow and to remain in the front line of the fight again, and following the spirit of the Conference of Paris. But I've just preparing this meeting and this interview. Look once again at the figures published by the IPCC, for instance.
Regarding the warming
yes,
effect.
to look carefully and open eyes what is today's situation and where and why we face such a acute ecological deficit, and about the amount of resources available, about the million of tons of plastic waste. I met a few days ago one of the people campaigning for against the climate change, and he told me that about the plastic bags, we need 5 seconds to produce plastic bag. We use it for 5 minutes, and it's polluting for 5 centuries. So this is this point. But we have to repeat and to act. So I think that Europe together, acting together at the 27 level, and obviously also through a new cooperation with the UK, which must still be on board. We have to be the green champion by mid-century, and perhaps to be more ambitious that the current commitments taken by the EU 28 for the carbon emissions, for reducing the food waste, and if we want to be more ambitious and perhaps to try to tackle the goals fixed for 2050, even earlier to 20, for instance, 2030, we have. It's the reason why the EU is necessary. We have to act together and to act with all the other partners. For instance, for the car industry, with the towns and the cities, the regions, and to put everybody on the same board.
In this festival, there are a lot of panels of discussion, various topics, and of course, circular economy, fighting climate change is a big topic. We have also a lot of people here discussing the future of industry, of technology, of all the opportunities and threats of the digitalization of our society. Do you feel that Europe will be able still to catch up that opportunity in terms of having an economy that is developed in the digital, but also protecting the citizens from threats, from cyber attacks, from all the dangers also that a very technological and digitalized society implies?
But for so many issues and so many threats, the European level is the right one, to protect the data, to protect the citizens' lives, the private lives. I think we have speak with Margrethe Vestager about this point a few minutes ago. She's acting very efficiently as a European Commissioner. But it's exactly the same when I was the European Commissioner for the financial services, because it's exactly the same thing. The point is, you are citizens. You are engaged and mobilizing your energy for some key issue and challenges. But the right question to ask each of us for ourselves and for our city and our country and for the continent is to ask how we can face all these challenges. The technological war that we are going to lose. You mentioned this point. The poverty inside Europe and outside, in particular in Africa. How to face and to act not against, face the global finance. How to act against the climate change. How to act in so many issues which are sometimes linked. The terrorism. It's clear that the only right level to act to face all these huge and global challenges to be together. I had my favorite slide
We
Unfortunately, I
cannot
couldn't have planned. It's linked to a slide produced by Mr. Cameron. You remember Mr. Cameron, no? Yes.
He's
and-
writing his memoirs. We will
Yes,
know
yes.
more about him
Okay.
at the end of the year.
Good luck. Mr. Cameron, when I was the commissioner in charge of the single market, was the British Prime Minister, he published to support what I did at that time, not for the financial regulation, but for the single market. A table, a slide, to prove to the British citizens why we need to be together, why the single market is necessary. And in this table, it is the G8, the 8 main economic powers in the world. And today, first column, there are 4 European countries among the G8. Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy. And depending of the growth of the other and our growth, what happened every 10 years, one of these 4 is excluded of the table. And in 2050, just only Germany remain in the G8. Germany, number 7. So that, yes, you can applaud Germany, but it's not enough because the movement is the same for Germany for the others, to be excluded. The risk is the same because that this table proves one thing, that in the world, sometime we are still hoped by the other region, but nobody is waiting for us. Nobody. And what we are not able to do for ourselves as Europeans, nobody will come to do at our place. Nobody. And I use the same figures that Mr. Cameron to show what is the situation. We remain together, 27, and if we are alone, as UK has decided to be alone. Being together, we remain at the table, where the order or the disorder of the world in the next 50 years will be organized. And the key point is, if we want to be at this table, if we want to be actor of our own destiny and not spectator, actor, not spectator, we must be European, in addition to be Dutch or Belgium or French. We must be European, in addition, not at the place, patriot and European.
To have the
That is
two
point.
identities,
And
the national
exactly,
and the European.
And if you have just one point to remember about this intervention here, thanks to European movement, remember of these figures. Huh? We must be together.
And
exactly to face all the challenges you mentioned, and I mentioned also, and there are so many others. We have to...
Absolutely. But I wanted to... There was a topic that we haven't discussed it here with the previous guest, but maybe also connected to the future relation of the European Union with the United Kingdom, which is... this is a project also of peace. It was after the war, and terror attacks, security issues are still very worrisome in some countries. I think the Netherlands and France and Belgium, the polls show that people are also worried about that. The United Kingdom was not keen on European Union army, let's say. Now with the Brexit, do you think that it's time for the Europe also have security and military strength? Also, considering the relationship with the United States and other powers, you think it's time for Europe also to become a protagonist on that area?
Yes, it's time for Europe to assume and to organize itself to be in charge of its own security. This is not contradictory. What we can do with other third countries, what we have to continue and to improve and to amplify in the framework of NATO. But it's clear that once again, what we are not ready to do for ourselves, by ourselves, nobody will come to do it at our place. So if you look at the new speeches of the American president, but you look at the strong influence of Russia, the new power of China, so many challenges around the geopolitical challenge all around us, in particular in Mediterranean. We have to decide to be a global actor, not only a supermarket. We have to build a strong political capacity. What is the proof of a global actor? What determines the fact that you are actor and no longer spectator of your own destiny? 4 points. An economy, currency, foreign policy, and defense policy. We are not yet that. We have to continue to consolidate, to improve the single market. There's so many things to do, and to protect the single market. But we have to do much more than that. It's the reason why we have created this diplomatic service, and it's the reason why, thanks to the President Juncker and the leaders, we have launched so many new initiatives for the first time, for instance, using the European budget for defense expenditures and investment in research and strategic research, and create this structured cooperation in defense. It's not contradictory what we are doing together, and we must continue together in the framework of NATO. It's not contradictory what we are doing on a bilateral level between Netherlands and UK, between France and UK. We will continue all this initiative, but we have to build by ourselves the main tools of our defense. And to be clear, I cannot imagine the future challenges of the stability of the EU, the continent of Europe, without a strong cooperation with UK.
Also, in that
And if you look, if you take a few minutes to read these 26 pages of the political declarations about the future cooperation with UK, you can see many paragraphs about the defense, and we have found at least 5 instruments to put in place and to implement this future cooperation. Absolutely. As far as the operation outside, cooperation between the services, fight against the cyber security, and the cooperation with the European Agency of Defense. We have already described precisely what will be the instrument of the new cooperation between UK and EU.
We are approaching the last minutes of our time. In times of Brexit, there's a theme that somehow disappeared from the whole discussion. Maybe it's not very wise of me to finish this interview and this debate with this topic, but I think it's time to speak about Europe might not be El Dorado, but there are still countries wanting to join. The Balkans, for instance. What is going to happen to the enlargement that at a certain point it was a big project, keep expanding the EU. Now we are trying to save the European Union that you have, but should these countries still have ambitions in terms of joining? Is it possible to embrace other countries and have even a larger family?
First of all, we need, it's not yet the case, to finalize this Brexit, which is for the first time one country willing to leave, that prove that the EU is not a prison, but we are not at the end of these negotiations, and we have to prove that it's possible to leave. This is the first priority. We have put in place several process of negotiation for the accession of new countries, and you mentioned countries of the Balkans. Some of them have already joined.
Yes, but some of them at
Please,
the door yet.
The Balkans are the very important historical and key regions for us, for the stability of Europe, and you can look at the history. But Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Croatia already joined for the progress and for the stability and for the both sides. It is a good thing.
You still have Serbia and Montenegro,
yes, but
and
we have already engaged the process of association and negotiation for future accession for the country of the Balkans, the Balkan regions. And I think that the country of this region of Balkans inside Europe, in the middle of Europe, must have and has the reason to keep the ambition to be once member of the European Union. But they have to be prepared, and we have to be prepared also.
Okay. My last question: you already said that you are willing and still have energy and interest in carry on with your duties as chief negotiator for the Brexit. But as you also said, this is something that is taking much longer than we thought. Would you consider at a certain point to delegate this huge task on someone else and pursue other professional avenues? After all, you are not a candidate, but your name comes a lot as a candidate for President of the European Commission in case elections don't give a clear picture. So what are your political ambitions?
First of all, I'm not nervous. I just want to be useful. I think I'm useful today in that extraordinary and complex responsibility to be the chief negotiator for the EU and to have built every day, to have worked every day for the unity of the 27. This unity, ladies and gentlemen, is not given by chance. We have built it thanks to the will and the wish of the leaders. And I worked every day to build this unity with a very unusual and specific method, which is the transparency. We have said everything every day to everybody. The 27 governments, the European parliaments, the national parliaments, the stakeholders, and so on. And I will continue until the end. And I think and I hope that this method of transparency, which is the key of the trust, the key of the unity, is transparency, will be used in the future for so many other issues. This task, this mission is not finished. Mm-hmm. And let me, I understand what you say. Thank you for your encouragements. But I will be focused until the end, 100% on the Brexit issue. And there is no problem at the same time as I'm doing today to take my part
in the debate,
in the public debate. And I think it is also my responsibility, because I have been engaged as a politician for a long time in France and at the European level, to take part, because the worst, the most dangerous situation for Europe is the silence. The silence is the reason of so many demagogy and so many campaigns against Europe. And we have to take care, ladies and gentlemen. Remember this, my figures, and remember not an advice, but my strong commitment and my strong appeal or ask to you: be careful about Europe. Take care about Europe. Take care. But taking care of Europe is not meaning that we think and we say that everything is perfect in Brussels. It's not the case. There is so many chances, so many reforms to implement, so many lessons to draw, even about the strong mistakes of the European institutions in the last 30 years. And the main mistake has been, in my view, to go on the line of what we call the ultraliberalism.
Mm-hmm. Without the social pillar, the social care.
And to forget what are the foundation of the economic project of Europe, which is the social economy, competitive social economy. All the words are important: social economy and market. So we have to take care about Europe. That means that we have to change, to draw the lessons, but please to open the debate, to work in the middle of the road, and to affront and to contradict the populists and all the Farage of the world and all the Farage of Europe. We want to destroy Europe.
I think it's
Take
what,
care of Europe. Thank you very much.
It's what this festival is meant to do. I think it's going to keep that way. Thank you very much, and good luck for the next part of your work in Brexit.
Thank you indeed for joining us.
Yes, it was a passion for work.
I should say we have more to come, especially right now at 8 o'clock at the church. We're having a big discussion on sustainability, a European movement, Metro, Eurocommerce, discussing different issues on sustainability, followed by a reception with great food and fantastic wine. So at 8 o'clock, starting just about now, at the church across the street. And first thing tomorrow morning, in here, we will be having a discussion on fairness and social Europe and what we need to do to preserve it. So 8 o'clock reception right now, and 10 o'clock tomorrow, we're talking about social Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Exactly. And thank you to Isabel for the wonderful
My
interviews.
pleasure.